You ready to go?
Whenever you're ready.
Let's call this meeting to order. This workshop is now in session.
All right. So I'm going to try and keep this brief, and that's about an hour and a half. We are not going through the code page by page. I'm not going to bore you to that. But I did want to give you an introduction of what the Code Review Committee has done and how we got here. So I'm going to go through some of the highlights the Code Review Committee did, some of the changes that were made from the previous code, and then going to hit some policy topics that the Code Review Committee tackled and how that got transcribed into the code. We started with our staff and consultants reviewed.
Let me just ask you real quick, then, so you're gonna hit the high points and whatever else, and give us kind of an overview of what we're
Yes.
doing. Are we gonna do any detail at all, or are we gonna wait, are we gonna have a chance next week?
Not next, we will, I guess
15th?
we can next week if y'all want. We are scheduled for the 15th to hit this again in full detail, public hearing, however much we want to go into. We want some highlights or hit some detailed points today after we get to the presentation. We can.
Yeah, I got a few things that jumped up that, I mean, though you'd hit, with Mike and I hit most of them.
Right.
I think you will again today, which is great. But, anyway, if you don't, I'd like to get a couple of shots in, and so as the rest of the commission is reviewing it,
Right.
okay, please, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't think it was fair to drop off the subdivision code without the introduction of the work that's been done to get here.
Sure. Amen,
Um,
amen.
It's, before I even get into that, it is a complete rewrite. Most of it came out of the old code, the stuff that we could keep, the stuff that still fits state law. There were some things missing, so we've added some things. That's kind of the real, 50, 60,000 foot view. First, staff and consultants started on the project, kind of looking through the existing code to see what discrepancies were in the code, what we thought we needed to change. They identified a handful of recommendations, and then the code review committee went through each of, the way it's drafted now, they're called divisions, went through each division one at a time. Starting with A, kind of bare bones, basic, where's the authority of the subdivision code, all the way through the full details in Division D. Moving forward, of course, we have our workshop today. Again, July 15th, we'll set up for a public hearing and recommendation from the commission if y'all are ready. If we get a recommendation on the 15th, we'll go August 17th to a similar workshop with council. August 24th, public hearing and reading of the ordinance. September 14th, second reading.
Will we be in the August 17th?
You can be.
Okay, but not, but,
I had not planned a joint meeting, but if we need to, we can.
no, I just asked you.
It was really the same thing for them, give an introduction of where we've been. So why are we here? We have a handful of Kerrville 2050 items that talked about updating the codes, specifically the development codes. Obviously, subdivision code being one of those. In the economic development chapter, we had to ensure that development services processes and existing codes are not impediments to development. Similar in the housing, ensure that existing codes, including zoning and subdivision ordinance and the zoning map, are consistent to support Kerrville 2050. And then, of course, the 4 other chapters talk about engaging a third-party consultant to help us review those. As you guys are well aware, it's a lot of work just to go through and review these codes. So having that consultant and the outside knowledge to kind of pinpoint where we need to move forward has helped. Just this one alone, we've hit 6 of the 8 chapters out of the implementation plan and some of those items. 2019 legislative action bumped this up in priority because they made some pretty drastic changes to the state statutes that regulate subdivision codes and the review of subdivisions with the city and counties. The existing procedures that are in our code are not entirely consistent with state law. Staff obviously follows the new state law regardless of what the code says, because state law trumps that. But it established a very strict time frame for how and when plats are reviewed, and it added the duty to document conditions, which I know the commission was kind of new to seeing conditions on plats. That was basically dictated by the statute changes from 2019. Whereas previously, we would go through quite a bit of back and forth with the applicant until the plat was ready. Then we'd bring it to the commission after we've had that back and forth. The way it's drafted now in the state code, we don't have that time to go back and forth in most cases. So we come to the commission with a few outstanding conditions that they'll have to finish before they move to the next step. House Bill 3167 was trying to fix some plating issues that I think were statewide, probably more in some of your bigger metro areas. For the most part, none of those issues were anything that we felt here or the development community felt here. Heard horror stories of some of the bigger cities of trying to get a process through or get a plat through. I suspect the goal is everyone has the same rules no matter what city you're in, but obviously each city adopts their own subdivision ordinance, so it still doesn't quite match up. Again, there were some missing elements of our current code and some of the procedures altogether absent, and just good to update some of our standards and review as we heard from Kerrville 2050 process. Division A is those basic general provisions and authority of the subdivision code. Division B to the plating process. Division C is the actual procedures that that staff go through to review those. And Division D is the improvements and design standards. Obviously, each of those get quite a bit heavier as you move down. With the code review committee, largely most of them not being developers or builders, just general citizens that were appointed to the committee for multiple reasons. They wanted to see some flowcharts and understand better how plating works. Because usually by the time average citizen gets to a project, a lot of that stuff's already been done. So just kind of walk through a real basic. There's a pre-application conference. Staff will meet with the applicant or the surveyor, engineer, and then kind of identify. We've codified two different options. Track 1 is the standard procedure. Track 2 we refer to as an alternative process, which really is more like what we do now, where you're combining different applications into one piece. Some projects that work, some projects that doesn't. The steps now in the standard procedure are the adequate facilities plan, which is kind of a general utility layout plan. Preliminary plat, construction plans are your civil engineering fully designed plans for the engineering and civil and infrastructure work, and then final plat. Tract 1 is kind of the response to those legislative actions. A little more detail on how that looks. Starting with the pre-application conference, the applicant at the front end of the project decides if they're going to go standard tract or alternative tract. Depending upon the project, alternative tract might be easier. It might actually be more complicated. That's kind of dialogue between the applicant and staff. Using the example of Vintage Heights, 500-acre project or 500-lot project. It's a lot of infrastructure, a lot of utility work, a lot of surveying work. That's a lot for staff to review in 30 days if you start combining projects in multiple applications together. That's not one that we would recommend the alternative track. Let's start with utilities, see if we can still get there, then move on to stage 2, stage 3. But if you have a small infill project that we know kind of what everything around it is, it makes sense to start stacking those things together.
So if you go with the standard track, there's a time frame for each part of that?
Yes. The shot clock applies to each of those.
A 30-day window for each one?
That's correct.
Okay, and if you go to the alternative procedure track, that's a 30-day window for everything?
It actually combines
Combines the first three?
first two,
First two?
the adequate facilities plan and the preliminary plat,
That's a 30-day window.
30-day window.
Okay.
And then if you're still on track and everything's moving smoothly, you can combine the civil plans or the construction plans and the final plat,
That's another 30-day window.
another 30 days.
Is that, Drew, is that by choice of the applicant or is that by choice of you? Let's say Vintage Heights came in and said, we want to do the alternative track. Can you tell them, no, we can't do that? You have that option? Because if you can't, like
Right.
you said, that's a lot to,
It's a lot. I need to look back at that exact language. I don't remember if it's applicant, election, and staff agree, or if it's just worded as it's an option.
That's pretty important for you to
Yeah.
know, because you could get flooded with two projects at the same time, two big projects. And, you know, your staff is gonna be 24/7 to try to get this done if that's what's required.
Right.
So,
Part of that, I think, that helps mitigate a lot of those issues is the completeness check. So
that's true.
we will not accept a plat if we think it's incomplete. And we'll go through with the applicant through a checklist. Do you have A, B, C, D? You're missing E. We're not accepting any of it. Come back when you have it all.
And the
That way
clock,
it's not sitting on our desk incomplete
Clock's not
and
running.
the clock's ticking. But if we give it back to them and it's not accepted, the clock has not started.
Still would be nice to be able to, the size of a project, to have the option to say, listen, this is too big a
Right.
project for this alternative track.
No, I agree. Going through the actual procedure itself.
Does the applicant get a copy of this flow chart?
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna put this together in kind of a application packet along with the
Good.
checklist.
Okay, good.
Once we have the official submittal, I don't know if y'all can read that, but we go through that completeness check. If it's an incomplete package, it gets sent back to them. Bring it back when it's complete. If it is completed, the clock starts. We start getting our staff review, getting it on the schedule for P&Z if that's whatever stage it's in. Then the option is approval, conditional approval, or disapproval. Conditions, as we've talked about the last year or so, conditions can require a revision before you really move on to the next step. Conditions can be delayed to the next step, whether that's construction plans or final plat, just depending upon what those conditions are.
Is it really clear what complete means to the applicant? So when you tell them this is not complete, you have a way to go, listen, this is what you were told, this is what's required, this is why it's not complete, not that just we can't get to it?
Right.
Okay.
And that's why we're gonna move to, we have checklists now, we're gonna move back to using them
Good.
religiously. If you are missing this piece, until you have this piece, you cannot submit it.
Good.
And of course, if it's denied, they reapply and come back. One of the interesting parts, if they can't get their checklist straight, if they bring it in incomplete, we return it. If they bring it back still incomplete, we do accept it, put it on the commission's agenda for denial. That way we just don't keep going through this incomplete cycle forever.
Sure.
Once they deny it, then they have to go back and start all over. Just to really
Drop it right in our lap.
Not so yes.
I think it's a good plan, and I just want to make sure you guys protect yourself and make sure you're not getting a lot of flack.
Right.
You have,
And we obviously want our applicants to know what to expect as
Right.
well. That's kind of been a big part of a lot of the rewrites is getting rid of that ambiguity in the code. They know exactly what to expect, what the clear standards are, so that we don't get into that
important
dialogue.
for you guys.
Again, general provisions, most of this came out of the existing ordinance, talks about the authority and exclusions of plating, and of course, stated and expanded our definitions. There's a couple of the changes that we did make. The previous code required a lease to be a separate platted lot. I think you can see several of the multi-tenant shopping centers around town or multi-tenant buildings. Each suite is not a separate platted lot. So that one has not been followed very well. To professional opinion, I don't know that it's necessary. That's up to the leasee and the leaseor to figure out what they're leasing. We're looking at property lines, not lease lines. And then we removed the exemption for the conveyance of land between adjacent property owners to be exempt from platting. I've seen a couple instances where this has been used, and I can't think of one that hasn't already come back as a problem. So, a couple different ways that people have interpreted this. For one, if Michael and David, if you each own a lot, and Michael, you're going to sell them 5 feet of your lot, you subdivide that, and it does not get replatted. So now you have
Yes.
split deeds, split platted lots, and lot lines that don't
Problems.
exist on paper, or they exist in deed, but they don't exist on plat.
Yes. I agree
No
with
matter
you.
really what scale we put that to, whether it's 100 acres or 5,000 square foot lot, the purpose of platting is to make sure those deed lines match the platted lines, which match the appraisal district records and so on. Kyle Burrow and I sat down and kind of went through as many scenarios as we could think of to justify keeping it, and we couldn't find one. So we did recommend that that would be removed. Any platted lot that is further subdivided should be replatted.
Does that get clouded at all by a remainder track?
No, we handle remainder tracts separately.
Okay,
And so the remainder tract is not platted.
right.
So it remains unplatted even though you platted a part out of it. And so you can't keep carving out of it unless you continue to replat. Is that clear as mud? I said that
Yeah.
kind of weird.
Yeah, it makes
Well, no,
sense, too.
it's
That's-
definitional, yes, that's
Yeah,
fine.
okay. That's kind of the highlights for Division A. Like I said, most of it's authority from the state to the city and how we go through that. Getting into the process, again, there's those 4 stages. Standard track does not allow simultaneous submittals, and the sequence must be followed. Each one is held to that strict 30-day shot clock. Plats must be reviewed and acted on by P&Z, with a few minor exceptions for some administrative plats. And the plans, the adequate facilities plan and construction plans, will be approved by staff, since those are the engineering documents. If no action is taken on a plat or a plan, after 30 days, it is deemed approved as submitted. As we're going through, we do have that application completeness check where we establish those pre-application requirements. Documentation of any previous conditional approval, and then if there is a 30-day extension, the applicant can request that 30-day extension. And that is not something that the city can require or request or anything. It's strictly up to the applicant if they want an extension. To help kind of make sure the applicant knows and staff knows what the expectations are, those pre-application conferences will cover the submittal dates, will cover application checklist, and then to keep from adding work to that, the applicant is limited on adding any additional material once the application's been accepted. So using the remainder tract as an example, if I bring a plat with 2 lots and a remainder, and you accept it, next week I don't get to bring one that has 3 lots and a smaller remainder, and then the next week another revision, and we've never finished the first revision. So if you're gonna do any revisions during that 30-day shot clock, you withdraw your current application and you start over. So we're
With
not
it-
just adding work to it
For the new 30 days.
with a new 30 days, correct? One of the other things that, not directly related to subdivision code, but through the development process, keep talking about the pre-application conference for the plat. We also have a pre-application conference for anything that we do as an option. We can meet with planning staff, myself or Steve, and go through a project, kind of point you in the right directions for what requirements are gonna be there. If your project is more than just a pie in the sky and you start getting some, napkin sketches and some preliminary drawings, we can run that through the design review committee. That's a combination of city staff departments and utility companies. They review that site plan, present comments back to the applicant, so that you really kind of know what rules you're playing with on that project and know where to go to complete your design project. It's not something that we've codified in this code, because obviously we don't want that to be tied to a strict timeline. Typically, we do that in a week and a half and get those comments back around to everybody. But that is built for that flexible dialogue before you start submitting applications. So
So the pre-development discussion?
yeah, we've got 2 different levels. Pre-development is really, I have an idea, let's talk through it. That's typically just with myself or Steve. Once you start getting drawings that we can review, then we'll go through the preliminary site plan process and go through the full committee and get those review comments back. Submittal timeline, because of the 30-day shock, we've tightened that down anymore. Instead of a deadline, it's now an application window. So for the August 5th P&Z meeting, you can submit your plat between July 6th and July 9th. That ensures that staff has enough time to review, get any comments back to the applicant, and get the staff report written to bring to P&Z by August 5th within that 30-day timeline. So anytime before that, we can have the pre-application conference, let you know what you need to turn in, show up on these days. We'll sit down with the applicant, go through the checklist, make sure it's complete, accept it or return it.
We're just standing by for the third Thursday in case there's an overflow or something. I mean, you don't know.
Right. Yeah. If something came up, that third Thursday is a called meeting. It's not a regular scheduled meeting anymore. Of course, we knew through a lot of the code review, we're going to use that as a separate time to dig into this kind of stuff instead of mix this with a caseload.
Thank you.
But the alternative procedures, again, allows the combination of those first and second step, third and fourth step. The goal was to make it more cooperative like we have now. We are still stuck with the shot clock, but again, depending upon the project, it may make more sense to not drag it out into 4 steps and cut it down into 2 steps. The return or conditioned plat, or return of a conditioned plat or disapproved plat, the revision time is 15 days. That's the other reason you notice when we do bring plats with conditions, either in the comments or as I'm presenting it, I say staff will review these comments and conditions when the revision comes back in. So the planning commission is delegating that authority to staff because as soon as they bring that into us, we only have 15 days. Well, we may not have a meeting within 15 days. The other thing we have considered in this draft is revisions come in during the application window as well. So we're not getting stuff coming in everywhere. We know when plats come in. We know what our timelines are to get back to the applicant, whether it's a revision or an original application.
So the timelines are coming from the state
Yes.
guidelines, Drew?
Yeah.
This is what they've now.
The 2019 legislature dictated the 30-day shot clock and the 15 days for revisions. And outside of the applicant requesting that, we meet that today. It has not, like I said, it has not been an issue here. But bigger cities with a lot more development requirements than we have, and certainly a lot more going on in the first place, don't meet those 30-day requirements. So I think that was kind of the driver of those legislative changes. But any condition delegated to staff, if there's an appeal, it comes back to the commission. So if there is something that's not clear or something that didn't seem right to the applicant, they still come back to you. The few things exempted from the shot clock are appeals, waivers, post-plat decisions, and post-recording events. So anything that's outside of that approval process is not subject to 30 days. Obviously, a waiver goes through a public hearing process at council. They're on a different schedule than the commission. So a lot of those would be very difficult to meet.
Right.
Getting into procedures, I'll go a little deeper on what each of these stages are. The adequate facilities plan, again, is kind of your conceptual or general utility plan. It hasn't been fully engineered, but where are the connections, what's the street layout? Any subdivision of land, excuse me, that's going to be built out in phases requires an adequate facilities plan. Any division that creates a remainder tract, kind of hence coming in phases, that remainder tract is going to come in the future, whether it's planned or not. Any residential subdivision containing more than 25 lots, and any non-residential over an acre. So if it doesn't meet one of those 4, you get to skip this step and go to preliminary plat. One of the new requirements, and we're going to tweak it as we're going through this process as well, is verifying some kind of title commitment. Currently, our code requires the applicant to provide a deed that shows ownership and a notarized signature line on the plat. Myself and our staff don't have the expertise to go to the courthouse
Right.
and do a full title search to make sure the deed you handed me, nothing has happened between that deed and today.
Shouldn't be your responsibility anyway.
So, several cities do it different ways. We tried to leave this pretty open, as long as applicant and staff agree this shows ownership, whatever that document is, whether it's from a title attorney, a title commitment from a title company, or some other document. It can't just be, I promise and swear it's mine. We've got it drafted in the preliminary plat. I don't think that's necessary that early on in the stage, especially as you're looking at some of the development projects. And Hunter, you may be able to speak to
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
You may be working on a preliminary plat on property that you don't own yet.
Right.
You may be under contract. So at that point, we're actually recommending for preliminary plat, the minimum is an owner's affidavit. So that if Hunter's working on a project he doesn't own, the owner acknowledges that he's going through this process. And then in that instance, the final plat, then we'll need the ownership commitment or title commitment. Construction plans. The purpose of the construction plan is to assure that the required public infrastructure is installed in accordance with all the standards in Division D and the engineering specifications. And the approval of the construction plan shall also serve as the capacity reservation for the infrastructure contained within those plans. That's the way we have done it, at least as long as I've been here. Stuart, how long have we been, as long as you've been here?
So when the approval of the construction plan shall also serve as a capacity reservation.
So
Explain that?
if we have an area of town that we have limited sewer capacity based on whatever part of the infrastructure, once your civil engineering plans have been approved by the city engineer, that capacity is yours.
Right, which would keep someone else from coming in
Yeah.
and doing something that would take capacity away. I got you.
Correct. State law only requires the city to reserve capacity for platted lots. And we know we have some areas that could be pretty tight, and we don't think that's fair, so we're giving that capacity reservation earlier than that. So that I don't come in and have a set of civil plans approved, I go start construction. Someone else that has less construction or a faster process gets in, builds it, plats it, and I lose that capacity.
It's a huge issue too.
Especially as you're installing infrastructure. And then I finish building a sewer line that I'm not allowed to connect. So we acknowledge that, and we're just codifying that, we are acknowledging it that early.
That's not part of like a contractual agreement between a developer and the city that
If there's a,
will have this, I mean, I am planning this and.
yes, it is. And by this code, we're establishing that once your civil plans are approved, I'll have to double check the code. I think the approval is good for 1 year.
1 year, yes, sir.
And once you start construction, obviously you're going through your inspection process, but unless your plans expire, that capacity is yours.
So capacity is
start
water,
with it.
sewer, and roads?
Sorry,
Water, sewer, and roads, is that what the capacity is?
correct. That answer your question?
Yeah,
I mean, a development agreement would be separate. We don't have a separate contract that goes to council or a separate agreement specifically for utilities. But we are putting this in the code so that the applicant knows, I do have capacity reserved up till a certain date. It's not forever.
So where we had trouble in the past is that people come in and they'll come in and say, hey, I want to reserve capacity for this subdivision. I'm thinking about developing it. We're like, okay, well, that's great. They don't bring us anything. And so there's no reason for us to reserve it. Then the person next door will say, well, how long does this reservation good for? No, the code didn't say.
Right.
It said when you have a platted lot, that's when we reserve it. Well, if you're doing a 100-acre subdivision and you're planning on X, and somebody comes next to you with a 2-acre subdivision and they're able just to outpace you, then the people that have the 100-acre subdivision can't get all their infrastructure built, and some of their capacity gets eaten up by somebody else.
I think it's a great idea.
Well, that's what I'm trying to pin down, because I don't want to hang the city out with some sort of contractual or perceived, on the part of the developer, perceived,
Right.
yeah.
So, one by-
Perception gets lawsuits, right?
Occasionally.
Two di-
Listen, expectations are a big part of life, and this is gonna help.
It sounds like it is, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
by putting it in code, it makes that expectation clear. If someone has a multi-phase project and they only get construction plans on phase one, and like Stuart said, someone else next door comes in and gets their phase one done, at the end of 3-4 phases each, we may not have the same capacity. But at least you've had plans approved and you're installing infrastructure. That can't be taken out from under you.
Okay, yeah.
Does that
But
make
you
sense?
got a go, no-go check off, stop, or whatever that says, wait a minute, you know,
So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll get the engineering plans drawn, so they have some skin in the game, if you will, at that point. And
yes, sir.
sometimes some pretty significant effort in the game, and so we
Right.
know that they're committed to it, and they're really looking at this project, especially if you get them to the point where they're approved. Because we've done all of our review, we say, yes, this is good. Now they're going out for funding or backers or whatever that looks like. Gives them a whole year to really kick it off. And if they can't get it kicked off in a year, they can't find
Okay,
investors
all
to
right.
do it for a year, we take our capacity back and we put it back basically on the market, if you will, for the next developer.
Okay, all right. And again, I hate hypotheticals, but here we go again. Okay, so the guy has this 200 track that you guys have capacity for. He goes to the far end and does the 50 that's over there, you know. And I'm gonna get the rest of them done, you know, I mean, I could see some issues, but if you're,
Whatever he has it designed for, if he wants to do 50 acres, if he wants to do 200 acres all at once. That's why that construction plans are important, because we know that they're interested. What we're trying to get away from is developers coming in and say, I want to develop this lot, and I want you to reserve it.
right.
And we say, well, we're not going to reserve it for you. And they get upset because some of our lift stations are very close to capacity. And this has happened to us
Right.
on this other side of town where the developers are competing with each other to get the plat approved so they can get reservation. And we thought that's really not fair, because they have a lot of skin in the game or a lot of cost to get to that point and a lot of time and effort. And then the facility to say, hey, we just don't have capacity anymore, somebody outpaced you. So we're trying to bring that up early so they'll see it and
Oh, yeah.
and now we'll have something to point to. Until this was in the ordinances and the codes, we had nothing to point to.
Well, that's the whole thing. Just, I don't care which game it is, just let me know the rules.
That's right.
Do you guys have, this is probably a stupid question, you have no parameters? Someone comes in, the construction plans are approved, you know they got a certain amount of money, but you also know they have to go out and get financing. Do you guys have any mechanism to look at what the feasibility of them getting the financing?
That's
So it's
not
just,
us.
it's
That's
just,
all them.
okay.
That's how you do business.
That's what I
All we know
thought.
is that can you afford what we need?
So, but the first stop is the 1 year.
Right.
They don't have anything out of the ground but in a year, then,
Yes.
Man, it's a great idea. It's a good addition.
well, that's a
Thank you.
wisdom of the,
So with the timing of improvements, sorry, I got behind myself. The timing of those improvements, currently, the preliminary plat and concept utility plan is approved first. You go into civil design work, civil plans are approved. You go build all the infrastructure. When the infrastructure has been accepted and completed, then you come to planning commission with your final plat for approval. Some developers are comfortable with that. Some get nervous that they have to get approval after they've already spent a lot of money building infrastructure. What we're recommending here is that kind of taking those last two out of sequence. You have preliminary plat, construction plans, then once your construction is approved, you can come to the planning commission for approval of the final plat. Then do your construction, then we will record the plat. So you still don't have a platted lot, but you have all of your approvals in hand before you start putting infrastructure in the ground. Like I said, some developers accept that and know it and just move on. We've had several not understand how they can put that much work into it and still not be fully approved yet. So just trying to reword that to where it's 2 steps. Kind of a simpler version. The final plat approval is contingent upon the construction plan approval. The final plat being recorded is contingent upon the completion and acceptance of all infrastructure. And the other caveat to that last one, they still have the option of providing financial guarantee for that infrastructure. Record the plat early, then go build it. If they don't build it, we have the money to go build it for them. Or we have their money to go build it for them. So,
Again, just for clarity, define recordation,
recordation is the
recordation.
recording of the plat at the courthouse with the deeds that now say you have platted lots. So, and currently they get the approval from planning commission after their final plat. Produce the final documents, chairman signs them, city staff, county, whoever needs to sign that plat. All the final signatures, they take it to the courthouse and record it. And so now city staff will hold those final documents until city engineer signs off on everything.
Yeah.
City staff will go record the plat. And nothing new here, but just going over the steps of recording. Final plat approved by the condition, all infrastructure is completed, all county filing requirements are met. If there's any infrastructure that hasn't been completed, they've got to have that approval and go through the financial guarantee. And if there has been any change in ownership throughout that process, a new title commitment will be required.
Question, like David said, I'm always thinking about worst case scenarios. If the city has an issue with reserve capacity, does the city have a certain amount of time to, I don't know, you have a lift station that fails, so your capacity is not there anymore, and it takes you 6 months to get it fixed. Is that a liability for the city?
It's the developer's responsibility to build the capacity that they need to serve their subdivision.
Okay.
And so if a developer comes in and there's no capacity in our system, we'll do, at their cost, we do an analysis and determine where that capacity problem is. They may have to upsize a piece of pipe, they may have to
Okay.
put a new pump in there, improve the lift station. That's cost to them. The city does not do that.
Right.
Go ahead.
Minor versus major waivers. This one's been pretty hard to really define, so I'm gonna try and give a couple examples to help paint that picture. Request for waiver for minor amendments may only include minor adjustments in street or alley alignments, lengths, minor adjustments to lot lines that don't include the creation of additional lots or any non-conforming lots. Obviously, provided that such amendments are consistent with the prior plat or prior approval, minor waiver can be approved by the planning director. If it's a stage that's already coming to the commission, the minor waiver will be approved by the commission. A major waiver is anything that's not a minor waiver. We didn't want to paint ourselves in a corner on that
It
one.
sounds like an attorney's language.
It may have helped a little bit. So the example I have come up with, it's easy for me to wrap my head around at least. Minor waiver is, extended length of a cul-de-sac. We have a 600-foot maximum. Without a waiver, you can go, say, 700 feet because the topography makes more sense. Staff or the planning commission can approve that. If they come in and, I've seen one example somewhere where instead of building a street, they're gonna have a shared green space and alley access or side street access only. So the major waiver is we're not going to build a street at all. It's not smaller, larger, any of that. The major waiver goes to city council. Other ones would be, Stuart and I were talking with the development today, they may request not to do sewer. based on the topography and where the existing lines are adjacent to them, does that make sense or not? That kind of decision would go to city council as a major waiver. So, is that one kind of clear? I think previous code,
They do septic
yeah, they would have to do septic, right? I don't know if
inside city limits?
that one's not, but if they continue to develop, it would have to be. And that was just a broker called me asking some questions, trying to figure out what they can and can't do. But as an example, if they wanted to, we've had another one that proposed inside the city limits, some large lots that weren't going to have sewer because the topography again didn't make sense to get it there. The remainder of it, that's more of a traditional development, would have water and sewer. So, case by case. I mean, the waivers obviously are the exception, not the rule. But if it is minor, it'll come to the commission or staff if they're at the staff level of approval. If it's major, we push it on to city council.
Okay, so it goes to city council, but do you guys, as the planning department, study it and give recommendations?
We will.
Because the city council's not gonna have the expertise to make that decision probably.
We will give our recommendation.
Good.
The code requires that if there is a waiver on the plat, it goes to council before it comes to the commission. That way, before you approve the plat, you know council's already said the waiver's fine, we're okay with whatever that piece is. And then we're back to looking at the technical standards of the plat. Some of those key policy discussions that Code Review Committee tackled, we've talked about them here on several occasions. Code Committee's talked about them through the zoning code, the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee, and all the subcommittees talked about them. So we're just trying to make sure we're looking at those items that we said we would through the Kerrville 2050 plan. Private streets and how do we handle those from a subdivision standpoint? Traffic impact analysis requirements, stormwater management requirements, and sidewalks. The Code Review Committee started with trying to decide what level of connectivity between a subdivision or a neighborhood was appropriate. And so really just starting with the thoroughfare plan. The red and green lines are your arterials. The solid black lines are collector streets. Obviously the lighter gray lines are your low-level residential streets. The question we threw to the committee was, are arterials and collectors enough connectivity to say that that is adequate from one neighborhood to the next in all cases across the board? And basically they said no. That several of these areas built out and several of the areas left to be built out, that may not be enough connectivity. So we are still generally looking to restrict private streets pretty heavily. But that's not in the best interest of our community and the connectivity that we desire. So that first bullet, collector level streets are not necessarily enough to provide adequate connectivity. And Code Review Committee recommended that we incorporate in the code some requirements for subdivisions to be able to be eligible for private streets. If they cannot meet those eligibility requirements and still want to move forward with private streets, they go to council for a waiver, and that waiver requires a supermajority vote. That would be 4 out of 5 for council. Private street requirements, no private street shall be permitted in a subdivision unless they comply with each of these criteria. The subdivision has no fewer than 20 lots. The streets shall be restricted to private street are not intended for regional or local traffic, so no collectors, no arterials. Subdivision is located in an area that is surrounded on at least 3 sides by natural or man-made barriers or by other private street subdivisions, and that they are not located adjacent to an existing or approved public street subdivision that can reasonably be connected, even though the street may consider a bridge or a culvert. The 2 subdivisions should connect. No private street shall be permitted within a subdivision unless the subdivision or the subdivision shall connect to any existing street stubs. And then an HOA is required for any subdivision with private streets. Covenants for maintenance assessments shall run with the land, and the HOA shall have the authority to collect from its members for those assessments. Additionally, design and criteria, public streets shall be designed and constructed by the developer to the city standards for public streets. And if the proposed development cannot meet these requirements, again, it goes to council for a supermajority vote for that waiver. Any questions on those?
So those standards include width.
Width, base, asphalt, curb and gutter, sidewalks. And the thought process behind that is, from our staff and broad experience that we have, several of us have seen private street subdivisions 10, 20, 30 years down the road come to council. Can't afford to take care of our roads. We're tired of the potholes. Please take them over. We don't want our private streets anymore.
Yeah.
Well, if they were built substandard to start with, it makes it very difficult to bring them up to standards. Kerrville recently had a subdivision that had private streets. The organization, the HOA, no longer wanted to maintain them. No, they didn't have any desire to keep them private. They did their maintenance. They brought the streets up to standards, hired a third-party engineer to come inspect it and review it to show that they met city standards. They were built to city specs originally, and so they were able to go to council and request council to take them over. And so council agreed and the city took over the streets because they were in good shape and they met our standards. So this helps set the pace for if that occurs down the road. Future councils aren't stuck between a rock and a hard spot with community that can't afford to take care of their roads and streets that city can't afford to fix or doesn't have the room to fix because they're not wide enough. Any other questions on private streets? So the only two that I can think of, the heights. So there was a lot more to the heights than just a plat, but Coronado would have been a collector running into the Heights Boulevard. With the development agreement and the thoroughfare plan change and some other steps, they were allowed to gate it. And then the Meridian is gated, or a portion of the Meridian is gated. I guess it's kind of isolated. Had existing development on one side, but those are the only two that I know of in the city limits. So now there's a handful outside of the city limits that are gated. Looking at traffic impact analysis. This one came up with the zoning code. Since it was really more of a new requirement, we didn't want to place it in the zoning code until we had handled it here first. Obviously, most projects start with plating before we get into zoning. So what we've went through, the goal was to create a clear process to make it easy. When is it required and how detailed is that analysis? So what we came up with was a new or infill subdivision plats are required to do a TIA worksheet, which I'll show you in a second. Submitted with the adequate facilities plan or the first stage of your development. The TIA, the full TIA is required if you're doing on-street parking in a commercial area or a traffic light is desired. And so that worksheet, I don't know if y'all can see that on your screen. That worksheet does not necessarily require an engineer. So we're not putting it already to an engineer to start, or traffic engineer to start working on this. Top section is really just information about the development, name, what are you doing, how are you doing it. The bottom section is just showing what kind of land uses and using the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generator. That's a manual that we will keep a copy in our office so that the public doesn't have to go buy one. You just go through, find what your land use is, fill out these boxes of what your peak AM, peak PM, peak weekend trip generations are. Based on a certain increase in trips, triggers what level of TIA is required. This one is actually from the city of New Braunfels. We looked at city of New Braunfels, city of San Antonio. I think I looked at one other one with Mike Wellborn and his team. So this will be required with the first project or first plat stage for every project that's a new plat. And we may look at coming back with plan development and some of the mixed use and requiring the zoning as well. Obviously,
This is an expense of the developer.
correct. So if you're less than 100 hour or 100 peak hour trips, this is all that's required is that worksheet. Once you're over 100 trips, a level 1 is required. Over 500 trips, a level 2. Over 1,000, a level 3. And the difference in those levels is the radius from your project that you're studying and how detailed those impacts are. And if there's this, similar to HEB, when they moved the light and closed Hayes Street, they had to do a traffic impact analysis. Through that analysis, they figured out there's some striping on Clay Street, some turn lanes off of Limos that they had to update because the way traffic moved differently. They are required to make those upgrades as well, even though they're off-site. So,
Where was this?
HEB?
I know, but not Clay doesn't cross Lemos.
No. Where they closed, or because they closed Hayes and
Street.
moved the light,
Right.
the
Affected the
way
other
it
street.
shifted
Yeah.
traffic patterns,
Oh,
I think it was Quinlan and Clay.
yeah, that's the
They
next two.
added a striped turn lane where Quinlan dead ends into Clay. And I think they had to do the same thing on Jefferson and Limos.
Jefferson and Lemos. right.
Sorry, Jefferson and Limos, not Clay and Limos. So, any questions there? The goal, like I said, the goal was trying to figure out, as we're walking into a plat, how do we know what we're going to trigger, and
Right.
when do we know that traffic impact analysis is going to be required? We want to at least start looking at that trigger as early as possible. That way we know what stage to put it at, when is it going to be required, and what additional work is going to come with that. Rather than we get to a building permit after we've already gone through the whole platting and zoning process, and then we start looking at
Right.
TIA and
That's-
the project
that's real
fails because
critical.
it's too much.
Now you're constructing an onion.
Right.
You put,
That too.
I mean, you layer by layer by layer.
Stormwater drainage. Again, several implementation items from the Kerrville 2050 plan. Under the water, we have pursue zoning ordinance amendments to support riparian area protection, enacting zoning ordinance amendments that would help the city enforce stormwater. Obviously, we're not talking about zoning ordinance, but stormwater is a topic. Encourage the establishment of a riparian protection zone in the floodplain. Consider adding water quality to the floodplain review process. Take a holistic approach to stormwater and drainage management. Establish reasonable guidelines and standards for more green infrastructure. Develop drainage design standards, including green design as an option for on-site retention and water quality standards. Not reading all those to you. So what we looked at this point, the previous code had a section specific to Nimitz Lake. Nimitz Lake, because that's our primary water source, did have additional protections on stormwater quality, mostly through the zoning code, a little bit in the subdivision code. The zoning code restricts certain uses within 1,000 feet, 500 feet, or 100 feet of Nimitz Lake, the river, or creek and floodplain, based on the runoff that comes off that type of land use. Since we don't have a separate stormwater section in the code, at least starting with the subdivision code, we're recommending this section to read all new subdivisions or modifications to existing subdivisions near the Guadalupe River and creeks, are encouraged to follow best practices for stormwater design and stormwater quality near the river and tributaries, as well as any city adopted guidelines that are as applicable. One of the other pieces that Kerrville 2050 put out was a Guadalupe River overlay district. The code review committee has not looked at that yet. So there are future zoning pieces and development pieces that may start adding to it. Staff has looked at the possibility of some stormwater and drainage criteria beyond just standard engineering to start addressing some of these ideas. But we didn't feel that the subdivision code was the place to really put all of those rules and regulations, but we wanted to at least start making reference to it as we start building those additional codes. Any questions there? And I know at least a few weeks ago, staff talked with UGRA staff to start building up some education pieces. Then we'll start looking at some policy guidelines and policies, and we know they're baby steps, but getting UGRA as our partner and obviously experts on that side to kind of help guide us there. As you guys are aware, the sidewalks have been a frequent topic through all of our committees, even some of our projects here before the commission. The subdivision code is generally where a lot of that starts as we start building out the subdivision. So a handful more of Kerrville 2050 items. These are some quotes just out of the general document, not into the implementation plan. But there's a strong focus on improving pedestrian connectivity by filling in gaps, missing sections of sidewalk throughout the city. Sidewalks should be extended wherever possible to enhance connectivity to new and existing neighborhoods. I like the short and sweet one, sidewalks, yes. We need walkability in the city. More access to walkers will help improve downtown. Implementation items from the community, neighborhood, character, and placemaking chapter. Develop and update and implement a plan that includes accommodations for alternative travel types. Obviously, sidewalks are beginning part of that, whether it's walkability or bikes, etc. Mobility, seek to install sidewalks and bridges at major crossings. Develop a plan that encourages and accommodates more sidewalks, more downtown roads to more pedestrian-friendly roads. Review the sidewalk master plan. Amend the sidewalk ordinance to consider all of these guiding principles. Review the new subdivision proposals for connectivity in relationship to the thoroughfare plan, trail, pedestrian, and bicycle plans. And to improve the overall quality of the system, encourage the construction of sidewalks. Kind of concatenating that one there, but parks plan, again, sidewalks, pedestrian safe routes, create a pedestrian bike connection from Schreiner University. We have done that one. So those goals, kind of short version, provide more pedestrian friendly connectivity or connections throughout the city, reduce and eliminate gaps in sidewalks, future and present, provide alternative transportation routes, uniformity throughout a subdivision, connect to adjacent neighborhoods, and improve pedestrian connectivity around schools. And obviously, some of these tied back to the private street discussion as well. We have private streets and there's no public access through those. We start blocking that connectivity between neighborhoods. Our current construction timing, sidewalks are required to be built with the building permit. Any commercial construction or addition, regardless if it's platted or unplatted, and residential with the first structure on any lot. The exemptions for residential property, all legally platted lots prior to January 1st, 1981 are not required sidewalks. Replats of lots originally platted before 1981 are not required sidewalks. Unplatted property that meets another exemption from platting are not required sidewalks. And any existing subdivision after 1981, where 75% or more were developed without sidewalks, new projects are not required sidewalks. So you can start to see where all of our gaps we're coming from. So, some of the recommendations: sidewalks to be included with the road construction at the development phase of the subdivision for residential projects. Rather than waiting for the building permit, one sidewalk at a time, the developer puts the sidewalk in when they put in road, curb, and gutter. Sidewalks to be constructed with the start or initial phase of any non-residential project. So if you have a large commercial shopping center, multiple phases, when they start phase one, all the sidewalks are built adjacent to the roadway. Reduce the number of sidewalk exemptions, reduce the number of sidewalk waivers, and obviously we recognize the sidewalk master plan is going to need review because we already know there's some inconsistencies. But back to the sidewalk waiver, the code review committee had a similar discussion as to the private streets. Should a waiver require a supermajority vote when it gets to council? And it was a pretty split, mixed feeling. So they decided it is not consensus, and specifically asked that we present that to the planning commission if there was not consensus one way or the other, whether it's a simple vote or a supermajority vote. So the code language there for non-residential projects, unless they already exist, sidewalks shall be constructed with all street right-of-ways adjacent to all tracks or lots utilized for the development purposes. Said construction shall be concurrent with the construction of the first structure on any lot, whether or not that lot is subdivided or not. Concurrent with the construction of any addition to a building or any additional buildings on the development. Single and two-family residential developments, again, sidewalks are to be constructed with street as part of the street infrastructure. And then for existing lots, obviously they'll be built with the first structure that's built on that lot.
Hey Drew, is there any standards required for sidewalks?
Yes, and city engineers also in the process of updating those. Do you remember if it's 4 and 5 or 5 and 6?
It's gonna be 5 and 6.
5 and 6.
down the road.
So 5-foot sidewalk for residential subdivisions, 6-foot for commercial.
Okay.
The other part of the big debate on sidewalks is whether they are at back of curb or moved into the property line. You have that landscape strip between curb and sidewalk. Kyle is still working with some of our accessibility specialists to determine if ADA is required if it's not at back of curb. So for years we were told if the sidewalk is back of curb, the slope matches the grade of the street. If the sidewalk is not back of curb, it has to be the maximum 2% slope. As you can imagine, in the hill country, there's some places we just cannot do that. And Holdsworth is the example I think of.
Oh, yeah.
It's back of curb and you're right there next to that street. I guess there's a bike lane, but you're right on the edge of the street. There's no way you can get a 2% grade, plus all your landings between. We'd have switchbacks for days just to get halfway there and back. Since then, Kyle has heard that since it's right of way, it is not required to meet that 2% slope. It still matches street grade, whether it's back of curb or not. We have yet to find that language in the state code, but we're still working on it. It was one of the things that came out of the code review committee. Any other specifics you were looking for? Okay. And this one was kind of an interesting one at the code review committee. The few builders and developers that were there obviously had some resistance at first. We're building sidewalks from the get-go. Residential construction, that means we are probably tearing part of the sidewalk out to turn around and rebuild it with the driveway and curb cut and everything else. After reading all of the comprehensive plan, implementation items and goals there, they all agreed at the end of the day it's probably better to fill those gaps than cut out a few sections of sidewalk. I've seen developments elsewhere where the developer puts in the curb cut with the street, and when you buy your lot, you have a curb cut already, whether that was the right side of the lot or not. Pick a different lot. so that there's not that waste of building and tearing it out. They build the curb cut and the approach and the full sidewalks with the street to the vacant lots. So there is that option. Obviously, that's a lot of pre-planning and not much flexibility for the builder, but they did agree and acknowledge that this was a good direction to meet those goals.
Going back in time, I remember sitting in council and hearing waivers for sidewalks like Methodist encampment area.
Right.
So topography really is the driving factor on waivers. Is there a guideline on like the 2% you were just talking about? Is that the trigger for waiver or not?
The 2% is not the trigger. The current code is based on, let me make sure I get this right. City engineer has the authority to grant a waiver if there is not adequate right-of-way width. So if we have existing right-of-way and there is not room between the edge of the roadway and the edge of the property line for a sidewalk to fit, the engineer can approve that. Beyond that, it had to go to council. Some of the requests came in from based on topography, whether that's street slope or back a curb up to the lot slope. Sir, what are some of the ones we've had?
With the back of the slope, back of the
Yeah, the back of curb slope topography.
cross slope is 2%.
Yep. Trying to think what else drove some of the waivers.
Yeah, they're complex slopes, so sloping down and cross is the most common one. And then just just the width of the right of way.
I think
Their biggest complaint is that, there's a sidewalk to nowhere. Well, the answer to that is, well, if you build a sidewalk, then there's a sidewalk to somewhere because the next guy's gonna connect to it. Builders also talked about not wanting to put in sidewalks because, their driveways will have to cut them when a developer comes in or when a home builder comes in. There's a section of sidewalk, maybe 10 or 12 feet wide, that the property owner has to cut out to put their driveway in. We said, well, that's the cost. So if you don't want to do that, my solution was, well, why don't you put the driveway in too? The solution. That way, if a homeowner says, well, I don't like my driveway there, and they want to spend the extra $10,000, they can move it. Most of the people are going to say, oh, the driveway looks pretty good right where it's at. I'll just keep it there, and the sidewalk will be fine. We'll all be ADA, and everybody will be happy. So I know it kind of got off the point of where some of these waivers at. They're all over, and they're all asking for different stuff. And every time council allows them to not build it, that's something that the city will have to build later on.
one of the other things that we haven't had any projects go to bid yet, but at least conceptually among staff that we've talked about, we know if we are going to increase the sidewalk requirement on the development side, we're going to look to do the same thing on our street projects as well. So we have recently went through and did some street reconstruction this last year. Future street reconstructions, we're going to include sidewalk in that bid too. Obviously, that means we don't go as far, but knowing that if there's not sidewalk and we're completely reconstructing the street, there's no reason we shouldn't be adding them. If you look at page 75,
Let me ask you, you keep mentioning ADA, are you grade down on the intersections with the sidewalk where you don't have an actual curb where you've got is there gonna be wheelchair access for people crossing the street?
yeah, there's still access point. I mean, there's multiple options for what that intersection looks like. But we do that, yes.
Yeah. Well, those of us that like to cut the corner would prefer that you take that curb out.
So if you look at section F, that's your appeal for granting waivers to council.
What page? 75.
I think the biggest thing we've done is we've taken all those exemptions out of the code. So there are no code exemptions You know,
Well, there's-
if you're not building them, you're going to council.
There's pretty much no waivers for development, residential development. If you're developing like Lennar or anybody else, you're gonna build sidewalks.
Yeah.
Or if you're building a commercial development on, anywhere, lease for lease or whatever you're doing, there's gonna be sidewalks.
That's the goal. You had all you can handle? Questions and discussions. Where do we want to go? I guess I'll take a moment while you're thinking about that. Again, our next step, we do have a meeting next week for regular agenda items. Coming back on July 15th for a public hearing and further discussion and recommendation from the commission to send to city council. But more than happy to dig in if you have some specific questions. David, I know you said you had a few.
Yeah, okay, we have a meeting on,
Next Thursday.
which is.
First.
Right. Wait. I'm sorry, what?
Maybe it's a week. What's today? Yeah, it's
Today's Thursday.
it's the first.
Yeah, we have a meeting next Thursday. We have,
Which is the first?
Right.
yeah, first.
Okay.
We have 3 zone cases. No, 2 zone cases, a conditional use permit. And 5 plats. Apparently people want to build here. I think we have 5 preliminary plats.
Mike, did you get a chance, you were in the process on the subdivision changes and the clocks and all that type of stuff? For the language that's in there, there's no issues, you don't see any issues for the city as far as someone's gonna come back and,
I'll be honest, I haven't done a final review. I think it's probably 95, 98% complete on language. There's always, it's like, a
Yeah.
painting, there's always something else.
there's
you
no
can-
red flags, you haven't seen?
No, absolutely not. And I think, remind me of your question about the alternative process. Was your question whether an applicant could select that and
Correct.
then the city could say no?
Yes, my question was, if someone comes in and with a big project, like, they have to review everything within 30 days and they wanna do the alternative, tract, can the planning department say, no, it's too big a project, we can't get it done in 30 days, and if it's not done in 30 days, it's approved.
No, really, we can't. They have an option to get it done in 30 days. Now, odds are, and I'm not in this world, and so these guys can talk about it more than I can, perhaps even Mr. Strachey. Odds are you're not going to be able to get it done. I mean, you can say, play all your cards, but that's why these checklists and, review on time and very thorough, because you're going to be pushing stuff back. Some level, some sophistication, some larger development, these developers and these owners are going to go, oh, no, I'd rather work with you closely. Let's do the alternative process. And in that case, I think staff would say, yeah, let's do that. And remember that the alternative process has to arguably be a quicker process. And I think from our perspective, it will be, because you're going to bust the 30-day clock. I mean, because they're not going to be able to fulfill the terms of the subdivision ordinance and all the submission requirements. And so, yeah, let's do the alternative process. Let's work real close and back and forth and have communication, and we'll get you through in a quicker way.
Bottom of page 23. At the time of the pre-application conference, preceding the submittal of the adequate facilities plan or preliminary plat, the applicant may elect in writing to utilize the alternative procedures provided in this section. Following the execution of that election, applicant may submit simultaneously an application for the adequate facilities plan and the preliminary plat. So it really just ties those first 2 steps together. But it is the applicant's request, it is not a staff acceptance. So, like I said, I could not remember the exact language of that one.
And let me add something too, and they can request the alternative process at any time. So they could come in and, you know, think, hey, we've got everything ready to go. We want the 30-day process. And maybe they're 2 weeks into it, 10 days, 2 weeks into it. They can call Drew or Steve and say, hey, guess what? I'd like to flip over to the alternative process. I'm just not going to make this timeline. And they have that option. And I think, you know, it just gives everyone kind of a, you know, you take a deep breath and you get them through. Again, arguably with you're going to be quicker than it's this kind of this hodgepodge, which I would consider a hodgepodge 30-day process, because I just think you could be the best engineer on the face of the planet, and it's just going to be hard to meet the terms of that.
Yeah, and my only concern is the ability of the staff to have a large project come in and say, we want to use the alternative track, I want to get everything done in 30 days, and they choose that track and you're on the clock and you have to get it done. If you don't get it done, it's approved.
Right. I think the caveat to that is they also have had to do their homework.
Right.
And if they've done that much design work,
It's a lot
and
easier
it
for
really
you
is a
guys.
complete project.
Okay.
If it is a lot easier to review, then we're halfway there, we're kind of there, we need some feedback. Where should I connect this line?
So you guys don't see, having to review and get this done in 30 days, you don't see a problem if they've got all their ducks in a row?
If they've got their ducks in a row, I don't think so. Now, the
That's
projects
my
where
only
we do
concern,
have,
have you guys under the gun.
the projects where we do have a lot of problems, that would be difficult. But really, I think that comes down to the construction plans more often than the plat. So the adequate facilities plan is still a conceptual utility plan. We haven't looked at connections or what size pipe or where are the valves. I mean, it's not that detailed. It's, I'm connecting to that water line and that sewer line, and here's my road layout, and here's how we're gonna do our internal stuff. But being conceptual, it's not to that level of detail. The construction plans, I know for a fact Kyle goes through probably at least 2 revisions on every set of plans. Just engineer back and forth, hey, tweak this, tweak that, this doesn't match quite right. And they redline and document those plans and send them back, and they get them back, and it's a quick review because they're only looking at those small revisions. So because we've separated kind of the concept phase from the fully designed phase, it's still feasible. Like I said, a lot of our projects, that's what we're doing now.
Okay.
But there may be some of those one-off projects, and you may look at the developer and say, we're gonna have a hard time getting there. If you're really ready to do it, let us know, but it's gonna be a tough project. So,
If the track changes, like you said, Mike, if you're on the regular track and they come in 2 weeks and say, I think we can do the alternative track, we can get it done. Does that start a new 30 days or?
it will.
Okay.
So they would actually have to withdraw that existing application. And now we're ready to combine it and
Gotcha.
move forward. Which, we only have one application window a month.
Sure.
So for most projects, I don't know that it really behooves them. If they
No,
have their
I
adequate
agree.
facilities plan ready in July, there's no reason to pull it if they're ready to submit their plat in August.
Right.
Because it's still gonna be 60 days for 2 projects. But again, it's case dependent. I mean,
Sure.
they may feel better that way.
Well, instead of 90 days, they can do it, and they've invested 2 weeks, they can pull it, redo it, and do it in another 30 days.
Yeah, that's true. So. Yes, sir.
Page 30, 2103, commission decision. I'm assuming that's for the, in C, it says, a commission may impose such conditions on the approval of a preliminary plat as is necessary to assure compliance. I mean, can you give us an example of where we would generate a condition?
You are the approving body, so we bring recommendations to you. Those are the conditions that you're typically gonna be approving. If you see something we
Yeah,
don't.
that's.
We've actually done that.
Yeah,
before.
we have done that.
Based on, on
Right.
their staff recommendation. I just don't want to take on the responsibility of generating a condition on our part.
We will always bring a report to you with our recommended conditions. if you see something that we've missed, you don't have to take our report. You can make your decision.
Well, we've had a couple of instances in the past where we had that come up,
Mhm.
and in the meeting, it was brainstormed, and David Jones suggested, we'll approve this if you'll do that.
Yep.
And nobody thought
Okay,
about
but
that.
all right, so that's,
Yeah.
allowing that. All right, well, then taking the next step, referring to the previous conversation, would this be something that would be within our purview to say, all of a sudden they get tangled and it looks like, and so they ask for the next 30 days or whatever else. It does, and we could say, wait, thou shalt have another 30 days or something like that. Is that possibly an alternative solution to?
Can the commission grant a 30-day extension instead of denying?
I can't remember exactly where it is, and I'm looking at the law, and I can't remember where we've included it in the proposed draft, but there is some provision in state law that again, I think has come over into the draft that gives the applicant the ability to ask for a 30-day extension.
All right.
And the interesting part to that is you all have to agree to it. So, and I was thinking through that today because I was going through the law today. I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense because that might even slow it down or it puts y'all, we got to take that plat to y'all. But I think that's to get the applicant knowing, hey, it's still going to go to them, and P&Z is going to be aware of it, and they've got to understand the 30-day delay. And so,
Right.
yes.
Well, again, I'm just,
15 days prior to the day of decision.
Yeah, again, I was looking at the law today. I'd wanted to be clear on the alternative process, and I still have to match up some of these.
well,
these
again,
timelines.
I'm with Mike. Yeah, part of our charge, my charge, I feel, is to not protect staff. They don't need protection, but they also need alternatives, and if we're going to stand behind them and give them an opportunity to handle situations or whatever else, it just looks like that might be a possible another path that could be taken.
Right. And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but I don't get involved in the development world very often, which is good. But it's also telling because that means they're doing their job and we don't really have too many complaints.
Exactly.
Right. And so my point is, even with the CRC, with a couple of developers on that and a couple engineers or an engineer, I don't know, 98, 99% of the time, we have no issue with either timing or staff's response or
Right.
even the willingness of a developer owner to do kind of quote unquote the right thing, which is to follow the law. We never have that problem. And so this whole new change to the state law, Drew touched on it. This is all, something happened in a bigger city and they called their state rep or their state
Right.
senator.
Yeah.
And so what happens is bad facts make bad law. And I say it's bad law just because it's kind of constraining. And for a development process and a development system, quote unquote, like we have here in Kerrville, we really didn't need this because we weren't having any issues. But now that we have this, we've got to follow it.
Yeah.
In fact, today I was thinking in my office, I got to go now figure out what they've done this year because I think they've tweaked it a little bit. And I think what they did, but I think what they did was find out that, hey, some cities didn't need all this. And so I think they lessened some standards. And so don't hold me to that, but that's part of the charge I have to do.
Gee,
between
just
now.
look forward to, again, they're going back in session in another 2 weeks
Yes.
to confuse it some more.
I gotta tell you something, I don't think there's any question that this staff is tremendous. The
Amen.
job that these guys do, I used to hear complaints just out on the street when I was on P&Z before. Well, that planning department, they can't get this, I can't get this, I never hear that.
Amen.
I never hear that, and I think you guys are doing a tremendous job.
20 years ago, and
Well, and let me add to that. Staff does a great job, and then the councils over the past 4 or 5 years have done a great job because what they do is they provide the tools, development
yeah.
services,
That's it.
resources, and a budget so they can, go get the software they need and hire the staff that they need and be supportive. And you always hear council always hears. We get new council members in all the time who, that's a complaint they hear. But I'm telling you, once they get into office and then they hear from, you all on the front lines, and they really kind of understand exactly what's going on, they understand, virtually 98, 99% of the time, there are no issues. It's a very smooth process, and people are satisfied.
And this helps a lot.
Process is tremendous, what you guys are doing. It's light years ahead of where we were 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. There is no question in my mind. Before you guys got here, right before you got here, and since you've been here, I mean, I've been on P and Z with
Wow,
like
that's-
4 different
It's getting sticky.
4 different guys that run these meetings. Or one was a woman, 3 or 4 guys. And it's the best I've ever seen. So we appreciate what you guys do.
Fortunate to come in when I did and get to see through the changes too, so it's been good. Anything else you guys want to dig into today? You're still flipping papers.
Yeah, hang
Come on,
on.
David.
I got one
I
more.
know you got something.
2205 on page 34. Improvement agreement and security for completion, a 110% maintenance bond. Is
No.
that, that's for continued maintenance? I'm not, I've lost the section here. Is that private street stuff or what?
Stuart, you want to help me on that one?
Plating procedures, it's under, page 34, 22.
Okay, so this is,
Timing of public improvements.
Not seeing the 110% bond there.
Section
Okay, here we
3,
go.
yeah.
22053.
All right. Just a little bit of amplification on that.
So when the construction of the infrastructure is going to be installed after we've recorded the plat, they have to provide financial guarantee for that construction. And that includes a maintenance bond, 110%.
So
That may
we
actually
require
not-
them 2 different bonds. One's a surety bond,
Right.
that after they start the project, that they're gonna finish it. That they're
Yes, sir.
gonna- that
Yeah,
if-
right.
If not, then we get to collect on their bond, and we pay that contractor to finish it ourselves.
Right, yeah,
Maintenance
that's what
bond
you
is-
mentioned before. That's what keyed me, yeah.
And then the maintenance bond is if they do finish it, and they did a crappy job, then we're able to go back in and fix whatever whatever doesn't work. So if we need to put new pipe in or something like that, there are 2 different qualifications of bonds, and Mr. Hayes may give us a little more detail as to what, or are you just looking for the difference in the type of the bond or the 110%?
Just a little bit more expansion on it. The next question is, what's the timing on the maintenance bond? Is it how?
So 2 years is what it says on here.
Okay, all right.
And then the 110% is because it always costs more to do it the second time than
It
did
takes
the
twice
first
as long,
time.
right? Yeah, okay.
Is that something that Lennar had to do? I remember when that was approved, there were conditions and they had a financial guarantee that.
Do they have to put up bonds?
Yeah.
Yes, so on their project, any of their projects that we accept have to be bonded. Same process.
Lennar had 2 or 3 parts. They haven't recorded their plat yet. I don't know if there's been a decision if they're gonna do record before they build or build and then record. Part of their development agreement, they also had another surety bond for the property. And then they still have their maintenance bond. Every project has a maintenance bond requirement.
All right, okay. Thank you.
I think they did a pretty good job. Well, I think the subdivision plan is, code is pretty good.
Code review committee dug in hard. They got a break from their meetings for a little while because we had a little pandemic. But then picked it right back up and kept going. We really dug in September last year? September, and started off with A again, what they had already reviewed. And through March, we're able to dig through all of it. And as you can tell, quite a bit of detail. So consultants gave us a good draft to start with. Now just trying to make sure it fits our needs. And like Mike said, we're going to finish our legal review Make sure everything's really just buttoned up, and then hopefully get this over to council.
Bruce, you have any comments or anything about what you see in this?
Not today. This is the first time I've looked at it. I had some things that kind of popped in my head, but I'd rather read it. And I like to know a little bit more before. So
You-
thank you for asking.
You're gonna come on the 15th?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You got anything else?
That's it.
Anybody? Questions?
Thank you.
Guess if we don't have anything else, we're adjourned. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.